the 3 Ds: deglobalization, de-dollarization, and decentralization. Flint West reporting. For 30 years, the world ran on one operating principle: cheaper, faster, leaner. Stretch the supply chain, cut the inventory, outsource the labor, fragment the production process across 20 countries, move everything just in time. And for a while, it worked beautifully. Prices fell, margins exploded, corporations scaled globally, consumers got addicted to cheap abundance. The entire planet became one giant machine optimized for efficiency. But there was a hidden assumption underneath all of it: that the system would remain politically neutral, that trade routes would stay open, that payment systems would remain accessible, that reserve assets would remain trustworthy, that technology access would remain commercial rather than geopolitical. Then reality hit, and the illusion cracked. Because once semiconductors could be blocked, people realized anything could be blocked. That was the psychological turning point. Not ideology, not propaganda, not conspiracy. Risk management. Section 2. The post-Cold War world optimized for efficiency. The post-2018 world increasingly optimizes for survivability. The world is now shifting from efficiency maximization toward resilience maximization, from just-in-time dependency toward just-in-case sovereignty. And that shift is producing what I call the 3 Ds: deglobalization, de-dollarization, and decentralization, not as slogans, not as political talking points, but as rational adaptations to systemic vulnerability. Now, here's the important part. Globalization is not collapsing. Trade still exists. Interdependence still exists. The internet still exists. Container ships are still moving. But the structure of globalization is changing. The old system rewarded hyper-fragmentation. The new system rewards controlled dependence. That's the difference. For decades, corporations stretched supply chains across the planet because every additional layer of fragmentation reduced costs. Design in California, components from Taiwan, rare earths from Africa, assembly in China, shipping through Singapore, final sale in Europe, maximum efficiency. But eventually, the chains became too long, too fragile, too interconnected, and the data proves it. Global value chain integration exploded from roughly 1995 through 2011. Then something changed. The fragmentation stopped accelerating. The World Trade Organization's Global Value Chain Development Report and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development data both show that after around 2011, the great expansion of hyper-globalized production networks broadly plateaued. Trade continued growing, but the complexity stopped compounding at the same pace. Why? Because beyond a certain point, every extra layer of efficiency introduced disproportionate fragility. The world discovered the hidden cost of optimization: no slack, no buffers, no redundancy, no shock absorption. A perfectly optimized system is often a brittle system. Section 3. And then came the shocks. COVID shattered the myth of frictionless supply chains. Russia's sanctions demonstrated that reserve systems and payment rails could be weaponized. Shipping disruptions exposed logistical choke points. Energy shocks exposed dependency risks. But one event in particular changed the psychology of entire nations: the semiconductor restrictions on China. Louis Vincent Gave of Gave-Ecal explained it perfectly. China looked at the semiconductor restrictions and essentially concluded, if they can block this, they can block anything. That realization changed everything. And China responded the way any rational civilization would respond after discovering strategic vulnerability. It started stockpiling, aggressively. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 4. By the end of 2025, China held nearly 1.4 billion barrels of oil in strategic inventories, larger than the entire International Energy Agency bloc combined. It added approximately 1.1 million barrels per day throughout the year. China also built enormous natural gas storage infrastructure and accumulated massive fertilizer reserves. This wasn't ideology. This was nation-state scale risk management. The old world optimized for efficiency. The new world optimizes for survivability. And once you understand that, the 3 Ds suddenly become obvious. Section 5. First, deglobalization, not the end of trade, the end of blind dependence. Corporations are now diversifying suppliers, regionalizing production. holding larger inventories, building redundancy into supply chains, friend-shoring, nearshoring. China plus one strategies. The longest chains in the world, especially those operated by American multinationals, are being shortened, thickened, or duplicated. Why? Because the longest chains were also the most fragile chains. The world spent 30 years removing redundancy in the name of efficiency. Now it is rebuilding redundancy in the name of survivability. Section 6. Second, de-dollarization. Again, not the collapse of the dollar. That's an oversimplification. This is about reducing vulnerability to concentrated financial control. The dollar still dominates global trade and reserves, but its share of allocated foreign exchange reserves has steadily declined from roughly 70% historical peaks to around 56.77% by the fourth quarter of 2025. At the same time, central banks accumulated gold aggressively for years. Why? Because gold has no counterparty risk, no sanctions risk, no issuer risk. It is politically neutral collateral. Countries are also building local currency trade arrangements and alternative settlement corridors to reduce exposure to dollar-based choke points. Again, not ideology, risk management. Section 7. Third, decentralization. And this is where most people misunderstand the conversation. This is not just about crypto. This is about parallel infrastructure, parallel payment systems, parallel energy systems, parallel compute systems, parallel artificial intelligence stacks, parallel logistics networks. China's cross-border interbank payment system processed over 180 trillion yuan in transactions during 2025. Brazil built PIX, India built UPI, Africa built the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. These systems exist for one reason: optionality, the ability to continue functioning if one network becomes inaccessible. That is the hidden logic behind the modern world. Not isolation, not autarky, not decoupling from civilization itself. Resilient interdependence, controlled dependence, survivable interconnectedness. That's the real transition happening underneath the headlines. The old globalization era optimized for cost minimization. The new era increasingly optimizes for disruption minimization, and this has profound implications. Section 8. Conclusion. Supply chains become less cheap but more robust. Governments prioritize strategic industries. Inventory buffers replace ultra-lean logistics. Domestic capacity matters again. Energy security matters again. Industrial policy returns. Strategic redundancy becomes valuable. The winners of the next era will not necessarily be those with the leanest systems. They will be those with the most survivable systems. Because the world no longer assumes critical infrastructure will remain politically neutral forever. And once that assumption breaks, everything reorganizes around resilience. That is what the 3 Ds really describe: deglobalization, de-dollarization, and decentralization. Not a collapse of the world order, a rewiring of it. This is the new operating system of the global economy. Flint West, signing off.